Do you ever look at someone really successful and think, what the hell is their secret? What are the things they're just not telling you? While I always have been open and transparent in the show, today I'm going to reveal one of my secret weapons. And he's actually been hiding in plain sight. And that weapon is a very good friend of mine named John Karapalevski, a person offering bespoke property consultancy services in development and planning. The dollars are always found in the detail, and John understands the details that you need to be looking into to maximize those dollars. This episode is going to be an absolute game changer for anybody that is serious about building a property portfolio and also looking at some really streamlined developments. I'm Jeremy Iannuzzelli. Let's get into it.
Everything school should have taught you in one place. With a property portfolio of over 17 million and an accountancy firm of over 16,000 clients, as well as being an accountant to some of the wealthiest people in Australia, Jeremy Iannuzzelli will be sharing his lessons on everything school should have taught you so you can build the life you want.
Welcome to What School Should Have Taught You. Now, this is a fantastic episode that I've been dying since the very start to share with you guys. He's a very close friend of mine. I've known him for well over 25 years now. He's a property consultant, runs a property consulting firm, not typically dealing in the purchasing space, but more so assisting people along their journey of getting things approved with various councils. And his wife does a lot of the drawings and helps out with lots of people, including myself. He's very much been a secret weapon of mine for many, many years, and very open disclosure to everybody that's listening. I've done lots of development deals with him, us together as joint venture partners, where we've built properties, we've subdivided properties, we've done plans on properties and sold them off. We've done built our own properties, which we rent out down in the south coast of New South Wales, and we've recently bought another one not long ago. So I'm actually very, very excited to bring this gentleman on board. His name's John Karapalevski from Karaplan, property consultant to Jeremy Iannuzzelli, and many other people that he's helped in his 10 plus years of being in the industry. John, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you very much for having me on. It's been a long time coming.
It has. I've been kind of, I'm going to actually tell the truth, I've been a little bit selfish. I wanted to kind of keep you to myself for all these years because I know how busy you can get, and I know how many people you help in the industry. So I know that there's going to be lots of people that may reach out to you post this, which is a great thing, and I'm excited for you. But more importantly, I wanted to really share a lot of the knowledge you've gained over the years of being in this space. A lot of the things I've learned from you personally that I get to share with lots of people that listen to this channel. Don't forget, you are listening on iTunes and Spotify. Like and subscribe, or hit that subscribe button on YouTube. But I really wanted to pick your brain today because there's a lot of people that go and buy properties or buy assets, and they're wanting to do developments, or they're wanting to know what they can do, but there's no real framework. There's no real advertisements of professionals that are out there doing what you do and explaining what you do so frequently and vividly on various different channels. So John, I would love you to share just a little bit about who you are and what you do, and especially, what you do for people like me and how you help people like me do lots of things in the property space, and obviously other people as well.
Yeah, so basically I help people out who have sort of properties that they've owned for a long time, or they're looking to purchase new properties, basically trying to achieve the most out of them as possible within the guidelines, sometimes pushing those guidelines to their advantage. Obviously, it all comes down sort of to like a different process that you're following depending on if you already own the property or you're about to purchase the property. So your forward plan would change from that point on. Basically, one of the things that we like to look at if you're going to purchase a property, to do some sort of a development with it, whether that be a granny flat or a knock down and build a duplex on there, or try to retain the existing house and then build townhouses behind it or to the side of it. One of the things we like to look at is trying to get a good understanding of what is, I guess, the best case scenario if everything goes your way and we can get it through council, but also like to know sort of what that worst case scenario is going to look like before jumping into that sort of purchase to do that sort of development, so that if things don't turn out obviously the way that you want to, you're still happy with that worst case scenario.
Now, I've got an interesting story that I want to share, and this is about something you and I did together in the south coast in a beautiful little place called Batemans Bay. It's a a beautiful, if you ever get a chance to travel there, it's a beautiful little tourist destination. And a lot of Canberrians or people from Canberra, they do tend to visit there, frequent there from a holiday perspective. But I suppose this takes us on to a great topic around worst case and best case. And I'll let you kind of share that story, because I think this is a really good concept of, when you're buying a particular property and you're wanting to achieve X and, you may achieve only Y. Does that Y still present to be profit if the best case scenario, saying X, doesn't come to fruition? So maybe do you want to share a little bit of that property as a bit of a prelude, and then I'll ask a lot of questions, because this is a very rare chance I get to have you. I know you're a very busy man. So if you want to share Batemans Bay as a story to everybody listening.
Yeah, of course. So that was one that we looked at sort of mid-COVID, right, sort of in the thick of it. There was a good point in time, a property come up for sale, not even a street back from the marina there. It was sort of on like the perpendicular road from where the marina is at Batemans Bay, a nice corner block, 640 square metres there. And the Batemans Bay Development Control Plan and Local Environmental Plan is very pro-development there. So that block being a 640 square metre block, we done some concept designs for that, and we had, what was it? It was 4 sort of 2-bedroom units on there with another 2 sort of penthouse units up on top. So it was a quite large development, plenty of parking and everything with that. It come up really nice, really well. We would have had no problems getting that through council, but we did a bit further sort of investigation in on what the costs were going to be to build that type of development at that point in time, when it was very difficult to build down there. So we made a last minute change on that one and went down the path of doing sort of like a terrace style development, and that we actually went through with the development application on that one, and we ended up changing things, and in the end we got approved on a 640 square metre corner block, 4 street facing, essentially 4-story terrace houses with a covered rooftop terrace overlooking the marina on them. So they were very large for essentially the size of the block that we were working with. And in the end, we got a very nice development approved there. However, because of that point in time, it was very difficult to try and find builders that far down the south coast. We'd just come out of the large bushfires they had down there, so all the local builders and builders that were coming across from Canberra were tied up rebuilding all those fire damaged houses to get people back in properties out there. So in the end, we ended up putting that one up for sale and still turning a very good profit in a short period of time. The interesting thing was that the people that we sold it to, in the end, they went down a completely different path again and just built 2 sort of standard homes on that site.
So the good thing that, and again, most people listening, before we actually signed a contract on that deal, we're very lucky that it wasn't a massive demand of properties in that at that time, because it was very early on in COVID, but you had concepts being drawn up for various different style of investments even prior to signing, which were done fairly quickly. Now, for everybody that's listening, it doesn't happen that quick. It's very lucky that, John and I, being a part of this together, were able to expedite things very quickly. But, John made a comment regarding a development control plan, or otherwise known as a DCP, and a land and environmental plan, otherwise known as an LEP. Now, again, we'll come back to that, but, there was a lot of exit strategies there. We had a beautiful 6-apartment, 2 penthouses, 4 quite large 2 or 3 bedroom apartments. I can't remember, but the reason why we actually opted against that, and John didn't say, but the reason why we opted against it is we went and got a quantity survey report being done. Now, people that are listening, they're synonymous thinking a quantity surveyor is a person who just does depreciation schedules. Quantity survey can actually do almost like a bill of quantities. They gave us a rough indication of what a 6-unit, 4-story apartment block would actually cost us. And I think by memory, it was coming back at roughly around about $5.5 million. While we got the land quite cheap, when we're coming back at $5.5 million, almost $700,000+ per unit, the market at the time really didn't have that value there for us to say that we could confidently build it and sell it at a profit. Hence, we went back to a smaller scale development, still quite large in nature, 4-story, 4 terrace style houses with a big shared rooftop terrace, or no, not shared, individual rooftop terrace on each, and beautiful views of the marina and water of Batemans Bay. So these were beautiful, and we're actually quite proud, but the cost, again, getting some quotes coming in. These things are going to cost an absolute bomb to build. As beautiful as they were, just didn't fit in with our overall budget. So we made the decision to sell. But John, I just want you to elaborate a bit more on what a DCP development control plan is and what an LEP land and environmental plan is, because they are two things that people throw around at a barbecue, but 99% of people have no idea what it actually means. Do you just want to share what that DCP and LEP means and why they're very important in the overall feasibility of when you buy a property with the intention of developing?
Yeah, of course. So the LEP is the local environmental plan. So that's essentially set sort of in stone, and it gives you a good understanding of what they're trying to achieve within their sort of total overview of that area. So that's where things like your zoning is set, your height limits are set, minimum subdivision lot sizes are set, and then you have your development control plan, which is accompanying to that, and they both sort of speak together to get the overall sort of outcome that council's trying to achieve for that area. So the development control plan, that one is a bit more, that's got like all your sort of setback requirements in it and things like that. And that's the one where you can really push the boundaries and you start to negotiate with council sort of directly. And they are, I wouldn't say lenient, but if you can sort of tell a good story about what you're trying to achieve with your development, that's the one where you can really push the boundaries and really do something very nice. One of the other ones that we did, another one on the South Coast, we really pushed the boundaries with that one, and council actually changed their development control plan very soon after we got that one approved. So that was one of the ones where they sort of weren't too happy. Well, I guess they were happy with it, but they didn't want everyone doing the same thing in the area, which is a good thing to start talking about along those lines of when people buy development sites and they've seen that other people have had things approved next door or down the road, and they just automatically assume that if they've got it approved, well, then we can get our one approved, when that's not always the case. Council is always updating their LEP and their DCP, so the areas change over time based on what council's trying to achieve at each point in time for that area. I've seen it plenty of times that we've had clients who have had land that's zoned R3, and that's great. You can do a little townhouse development on it. All of a sudden it gets rezoned to R4 and they're cheering. They're like, yeah, now we can go and build units on there. But they had no idea that the way council had just changed everything. Yes, they want units there, but they don't want these little groups of sort of 4-story units on 600-700 square metre blocks. Their actual plan now wants developers to go and amalgamate multiple blocks together and do larger developments. So it essentially makes their block nearly useless in terms of an isolated development site. So
it would have been better. So it would have been better for their block to remain as, say, R3,
yes,
as opposed to R4. So there is negatives sometimes, not all the time. There's
not all the time.
Many positives of zoning moving from R2 to R3 or R3 to R4, or maybe commercial zoning. But there are negatives. So in that particular case, the example you've given, and just get you to elaborate a little bit more on that, you're saying that a property may be zoned R3 where you've got the ability to do townhouses, feasible for most people, not most, but feasible for many people to do if they've got access to funds and knowledge. But now their block's been rezoned by the council to R4, which we have seen a lot of that happen. Now things that are 400 and 800 metres away from, main arteries like train stations. And you're saying that it's actually not beneficial for an owner to have that zoning change because of amalgamation issues.
So those ones near the train stations and town centres are slightly different, because that was a sort of state planning code that sort of overrules the council codes. But in terms of the council codes, so let's say, for example, they got an area that's fairly close, sort of on the same, I guess, premise that the state has done over the top. But you've got these sort of council areas where there was a little town centre and they've seen a lot of people start to move into that area. So there's a bit of growth coming, and now it's time to sort of redevelop that area and put in some more higher density developments. So they go ahead and rezone a couple of streets surrounding that town centre to R4 now. But then within their LEP and DCP, there will be sort of there'll be a requirement in there to do that sort of development that you would put on an R4 zone block requires a certain block size. And in a lot of cases, these smaller blocks don't meet that requirement. So unless you can prove to council that you've essentially been built out and there's these large developments all around you and you're a little isolated block in the middle, there'll be a point in time where they will say there's really nothing you can do to it unless you start amalgamating sort of the blocks that haven't been developed that are joined with you to do larger scale development.
Yeah. Now, again, for a lot of people listening, and we've got listeners all over the state, I've actually got listeners, believe it or not, from all over the world. But, if you're hearing terms like R4 and R3, they are zoning requirements or zoning mechanisms more to the state of New South Wales. LEPs, DCPs, generally, discussed when you're talking about New South Wales residential or maybe commercial developments, for argument's sake. Different states will have different zonings. I know, for argument's sake, like Queensland, you've got, medium or low medium rise density, you've got medium density, high density, you've got R20, R40, R60, R80, R100 in WA. You've got growth zones and residential growth zones in Victoria. So each state will have a very different terminology for what they zone their land and things you can do with that land. So it's important and crucial that you kind of get an understanding on a state-by-state basis because, John, no states are the same as far as what you can do with a property. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. No states are the same. You have councils that aren't the same. It purely depends on how that council interprets their rules as well. And that's when it comes down to having a good team of people together and having someone that knows how to interpret those specific rules and sort of those boundaries you can push within certain council areas can completely change the game with what you're able to achieve on your development site.
So would you, now again, it's a very biased question I'm going to ask because I'm assuming I know what the answer will be, but do you think, and you've worked in a variety of different places and you've worked with a variety of different people, but how often do you find that people who have bought, say, a property that has development potential, how often have they came to you and said, what can I do with this particular property, thinking that they could have done X, Y, Z because that's what their friend did, and actually finding out that they can't do what they achieved? Is that something that happens often for you or not really?
Yes.
Do you want to share that little bit of a...
No, of course. It happens very regularly. Like I said, you'll have a lot of people that have bought sites. They've had holiday houses that they've used over the years and they bought the biggest block they could find in a well-located area, always on the basis that one day before they retire, they'll go and redevelop that site and that's their retirement fund. Then it comes time to it and there's been rules put in place that prevents that from happening for various reasons. The big one that actually come in all across New South Wales that sort of flew under the radar a bit was when the state government brought in the rule regarding sort of flood zone land. There's areas around where some councils just put a complete blanket rule as if you're in a sort of higher grade flood zone, whether there's developments all around you that have been proved many times in the past, they will just completely block you out and there's nothing you can do on it that maximizes the use of that site. So if there's a single dwelling on there, no matter how big that site is, you can only replace it with a single dwelling regardless of the zoning.
And look, I get asked this all the time, Jeremy, I've bought this particular property, it's got great development potential, I'll probably look at doing this at 5 or 10 years time, and I talk to them and say, guys, sometimes it's actually worthwhile to action it straight away because some of these risks that you said, but what are some other risks, more so around what you've seen on the building side, because I know you work with lots of different builders. What are some other risks of waiting too long to do some of these things?
So outside of sort of the planning part of it with sort of council rules and things like that changing, the other thing that changes is obviously the cost of the development itself, not just the build cost. People always sort of focus on the build cost. And yes, the build cost goes up. Hopefully the property values go up and they assume that's all just going to be okay. But we're seeing it time and time again. You'll get council approvals come through and then all of a sudden there's another DA consent item in there that's another report that gets thrown in that you got to go to another consultant, and there's another sort of couple of $1,000s that adds to your bottom line that you sort of weren't planning on. And it's just, as time goes on, the red tape that you got to go through and every report you got to keep adding to it just increases the overall cost of the development.
And again, another thing that's flown under the radar that I've faced personally, because, again, a lot of people that follow my story, and I'll be sharing a bit more about some recent properties I've purchased in upcoming episodes, so stay tuned for that. But some things that have flown in across all boards of building regulations have been more requirements around heating and cooling and otherwise known as BASIX and stuff. Do you want to share? Do you want to share a bit of that? Sorry. Do you want to share a bit of that? How it's changed over the years? And this is not just specific to New South Wales. This is specific to all states, and under different names, of course. But just want to share the evolution of what's changed when it comes to actually building a property today, say versus 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, well, one of those the BASIX is a big thing actually. So earlier on, it wasn't too much of an issue. Everyone used to sort of not like it because they made you have to have a rainwater tank in your backyard.
Now, for everybody that's listening, if you just want to share what BASIX is, because it's not a word that's thrown around very often.
BASIX is sort of the main, it's looking at the energy, sort of the sustainability of the design, and that has a look at sort of your thermal rating and your water usage rating based on the design of your property. So they look at things like, with this size property, is it, how much power is it going to use to heat and cool the dwelling in certain periods of the year? And then they have ratings around that as to sort of what limit you have to reach. So the biggest change, which we've seen the most amount of cost come into it, is when a couple of years ago now, the state government brought in the requirement for all houses in New South Wales to have a 7-star rating, which at the time they were talking, the government, when they were pushing it, was saying it's only going to increase the cost on each dwelling by a couple of $1,000s, where now we're seeing those costs blow out, and we're talking $20,000 to $30,000 per dwelling that you're building. So on a townhouse development, that's a huge amount of money that you're throwing around that you wouldn't have had to, let's say, 5 years ago. And that's purely around things like your glass rating for your windows. Everyone loves big windows on their houses, and there's a ratio there, the size of your window for the size of your floor area. We're seeing time and time again now that you really can't build a new property with large windows without going double glazing throughout the entire house. And then you have other things that come in with your flooring requirements. So there's other products that are coming out, but it's all just adding to the overall cost of your development. So as time goes on and these ratings change and new products come out, there's more and more cost being added to your development.
And not necessarily are these costs actually adding a value at the end. I don't care if you've got double glazed windows.
At the end of the day, there's no visible value from it. Yes, if you're living there day in, day out, you might notice that it feels a little nicer and you don't have to turn the heater on as soon, or you don't have to turn the air conditioner on as soon. But outside of that, for a property developer, there's no real value in terms of how the development presents itself to the market.
And again, for lots of people,
7-star rating, but as anyone buying a house, I haven't really seen it marketed too much in terms of what people are buying these days.
And that, I suppose, and what I was going to say, that for a lot of people, that's a reason why houses are becoming more expensive, because you've got your red tape, your bureaucracy involved on a local government or state government basis. And I know that you and I, John, have battled both local government, councils and shires, as well as state government. And it's everywhere you turn. If you're looking to develop property, everywhere you turn, there's another report, an arborist report, a flora and fauna report. They found a snail. You need to now do a report on the snail that's on the land.
Yeah. The best ones we see is the council overlays of a particular area, and all of a sudden it finds itself into your planning certificate for the property, and it says the property you've bought is rated at this. For example, let's talk acid sulfate soils. They will just automatically blanket rate your property based on its location sort of within the area, and as part of your development application, you've got to go and get your acid sulfate soils test report done. And to be honest, the last 3 we've had done has been rated class 1 or 2 on the council overlay. You go and get the report and it comes back in there. The assessor's pretty much saying, why did you send me out here? There's no acid sulfate soils in this ground that we could find, but it's purely another report you've got to get to tick a box to even be able to lodge your application to council in the first place.
So a lot of costs involved involved with getting things into a position to be development ready. And that's what, again, for everybody that's listening, these are the things that you need to make sure that you're really consulting with the right people before you commence a development or before you even buy a property. There's many times that, John and I, for argument's sake, we've sat down to do feasibilities, and often it's between the times of 10:30 at night and 1 o'clock in the morning, but we've become a lot quicker at it to work out whether something's going to work or not and whether we go forward and make an offer on a particular property. But if you don't have that knowledge, and again, these are things that John's built up over 10 to 15 years of being in the industry, and myself built up over many, many years of doing it as well. You don't try to do this at home if you don't have the knowledge, because I, as an accountant, I've seen so many people lose their pants and lose their shirts doing deals and having to stop halfway through or having to liquidate, or, I've seen relationship breakdowns as a result of it and lots of money being lost. And, for every one or two that you see have done well, there's 10 or 12 on the other side that have done quite poorly. So there's people like John out there that you can chat with and do a bit of a pre-feasibility check to actually find out, well, what is and what can be done on that particular property, because it could be site access is not there. Trees is probably one of the biggest things that I've seen. I don't know what people were thinking all those years ago to go plant the biggest gum tree they could find. Well, a gum tree in their backyard to turn into the biggest gum tree in the street. But those are the things which sometimes can kill a development straight away, because you may not get approval or authority from, the local council or shire to be able to cut it down. So they're things that you do need to consider. Now, John, I want to deep dive a little bit more into your knowledge. How often are you, and again, you don't have to go too deep into it, but how often are people presenting things to you where they do want to go and do X, Y, Z, and you've gone ahead and told them, guys, it can't be done? Is that something that happens quite regularly for you, or are you finding other solutions towards it?
It happens very regularly. Like I said, we've had clients that have come to us in the past where they've seen a townhouse development up the road, literally 5 doors up the road, same location, same council, all the rules and everything's the same, but right where that block is, where they got that townhouse development approved, that had the right slope to be able to make their stormwater work without going and having to knock on all the neighbours' doors to try and get approval to build an easement through it. And they've gone ahead and just purely seen what had been done in the past, bought the block 5 doors down, paid a significant amount for it on the premise that they were going to go and do a 5 townhouse development on it, bought it to us at that point saying, hey, can you guys do a design for this? And we want something along these lines. This house up the road has had it done. And we stop them in their tracks right then and there and say, this is almost going to be impossible from what we can see, unless you're going to get all these neighbours on board to get an easement through their yards to be able to drain your stormwater.
So slope is little things like slope is a very important thing to consider as well.
That's right. So most councils want your stormwater to drain naturally, so via gravity to their existing stormwater network. So if your block is sloping back, that can knock it out of the park straight away, where it's not even able to be done without going and get approval from the neighbour behind you to put a drain in his backyard and go out to his front yard, so it goes via gravity through his block.
Beautiful. So John, what should people be doing to avoid these type of issues if they are wanting to go down the path of, wanting to buy something where it's even as little as a granny flat? Should they be coming to you first? Are there things that they can read or material that they can access to educate themselves on it? Is there a bit of a direction you can point some people to?
These days, there's a lot of material out there, obviously, because of the amount of material out there. And we're talking that there's so many specifics around it. And like I said, most council areas are different in the way their rules are written and the way they interpret them as to what can be done there. It becomes a little bit hard to say that, go out and read this and you'll get a good understanding of what can be done. I'd always recommend having a right team in place. So if you're just starting out, go around, do the research and try to see who you can put together in that team so you can have a look at some various sites and start asking the questions.
So who are the professionals in that team though? Is it can a lawyer help you with this?
Usually you'd like to find a good town planner or a good building designer. Building designer / architect is a good one to start with, because obviously they've done the designs and been a part of the application process from whenever their client has purchased the block right through to getting the approval, and sometimes right through the building process. So they're a good one to start with. They also usually have a good network of other consultants that have been a part of these processes as well, like stormwater engineers and the geotech engineers for different site conditions. So a building designer or architect's a good place to start. Town planner is another good one to have a chat to, but what we found, the town planners understand the DCP and the site itself, whereas the building designer or architect has a bit more understanding of whether or not a physical dwelling can be built within the parameters of that site.
So it's not just knowing the theory, but it's also knowing the practicality behind the overall.
Yeah, that's right, because obviously the DCP has different setbacks as to how far you can be from your side boundaries, your front boundaries, your rear boundaries. Then sometimes they step in as your building gets higher, say to your second level. Then some other councils, they have a ratio that depending on the overall height of the building, that setback increases as well. And then sometimes that, depending on the width of the block, that could essentially make your second level impossible to achieve based on that ratio. So it's really a building designer or architect's a good place to start.
So I did say at the very start, John is my secret weapon, because there is so many things to consider. You know, to be a master of absolutely everything, you need to engross yourself in this day in, day out. Now, a building designer, I'm a big fan of building designers because, again, they're in the trenches. They're doing this on a daily basis. They know what can work and what can't. But I want to then just bring now the attention to the building designer, because I've seen so many clients get far too carried away with, you know, designing the actual property that they want to build. And it's not just maybe their own home. It could be a duplex or a triplex or maybe small townhouses. How crucial is the building designer and getting the actual brief to them being spot on? And that brief doesn't just include, I want, you know, parapet walls, or, you know, I want curved edges, and I want, you know, aluminium doors and all these things, but the actual design of the property itself and a budget. Is that something that, you know, what's a couple of the things that we need to brief a building designer of if we are going to go down the path of, you know, found the right site, we know what we can do now, we're confident, we've spoken to the right professionals, we now want to proceed with getting this all done. What's a couple of things for our listeners today that they can brief their building designer on to make sure that they're, whether granny flat or development they're going through, whether it's small or large, what are the points that they need to brief that building designer on to make it work?
I would say before even going to a building designer, do your own research to start with and try to get an understanding of building designers that have worked on particular projects that have essentially made it through from the time of the original design to actually being physically built. I've seen it time and time again where we've had builders come to us that have had a client that has went and paid an architect huge amounts of money, had this beautiful house designed, got it approved in the end because the council's happy it's met all their guidelines and ticked all the boxes, and they're all getting excited, and they've gone to the builder to go and get this thing quoted up, and the builder then reaches out to us and say, hey, we've got this client that's had this approved, but we can't build it. It becomes, well, it's obviously anything can be done for the right amount of money, but they know from the get-go that the client's not going to agree to pay the type of money that's required to make their project work. So they've come to us, and Steph, my wife, as building designer, has to go ahead and essentially pull it all apart and start from scratch, nearly off the same basis, to get something that the builder can physically build at a reasonable cost for the client.
So find someone who's been there, done that, and who's got a bit of an understanding of the area itself. What are some other points that we should be briefing a building designer on?
Yeah, so the other thing is, just because it looks good on paper and the thing can get approved, you want to brief your designer if you've got a budget in mind that you're trying to stick to. Like I said, building designers, the good ones, are a part of the project from essentially inception to completion. So they've seen sort of what has been designed and then what the builder has quoted to build, and then they get an understanding of variations and things that come up. So a good building designer can design around that and get you to a good point where you could almost get a turnkey price from a reputable builder based on good design and have virtually no variations throughout the build. And we've had that plenty of times on our own developments where we've gone in with a good design, got a fixed price building quote from the builder, and that's how it's ended up. There's been no variation throughout the build.
So it's important. So it's important to share what you're expecting to pay, and then having a building designer do the drawings that are required, and the reports are obviously required to do it with inside your budget, because there's no point having beautiful voids and then it comes with all the steel beams that need to be done to support the dwelling itself if you've got, for argument's sake, a Mazda budget.
That's correct. There's very little things as well. Like the client wants something particular, and then a good building designer should be able to tell them, if you make this minor change that doesn't change the overall sort of design of what you're trying to achieve, but it could change the quoted build cost. We're talking like $50,000 at a time, depending on what that piece was that they changed.
Now, John, you mentioned, a $50,000 difference in terms of building costs. Can you give me an example of what would be a $50,000 difference in building costs? Because I think that is one of the biggest, happy times or letdowns in anyone's journey, whether they're building their own home or building an investment, is getting that extra fee that they didn't assume or didn't even think about. What would be an example of something that's quite material that would change a cost?
Yeah, so a good example, purely the way a designer sites the house on the block to suit the slope of the land, that could be the difference between sort of, a $50,000 cost and minimal increase in cost, just purely when it comes to drop edge beams going around the whole house. So if a designer has put the house at a certain level and it's within the guidelines of council, usually council won't say to you, why'd you put the house at this level when you could have put it at this level and dropped it down a couple $100 million and not needed these drop edge beams around the entire house. A good building designer should be able to site the house on the block in the most feasible way to reduce those site costs, because site costs are a real unknown cost. The other thing is if a client wanted a specific sort of span in the building where it would require significant structural steel beams, and you can pull that back slightly and still achieve this similar outcome, but get rid of those large structural steel beams and change them with like a timber LVL, as long as the structural engineer is able to make that work, which a good building designer should have a good understanding of what the limits are for that to happen. I've seen it time and time again where they've been able to make that change and significantly reduce the build cost.
So you want a solutions-focused professional. You don't want someone just to absolutely mimic what you're saying and draw it and do all the building design. You want someone to come to you with a solution that, hey, this is what we can do to still give you what you want but save money, and it could be various different ways, from alternative building methods or materials, bringing that span back. Site costs is a big one.
I'll give you a good example. There was a property in Gregory Hills down in southwestern suburbs of Sydney.
So for anybody that's listening that's not familiar with Sydney, we're talking maybe about 50 minutes southwest of Sydney on a good day of no traffic, and maybe an hour and a half. But a very growing pocket of New South Wales, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people building there. And I think over the last maybe 10 to 12 years, there's probably been more than 5,000 or 6,000 dwellings being built in this particular area.
Yeah, so we had a client that purchased a pre-approved duplex site. So the previous owner went ahead and had a duplex plan approved for that site. They were side-by-side attached 3-bedroom dwellings, and then the client purchased it and was going to build those. They went to the builder to go and get it quoted up. The builder had a look at the plans and said, there's a whole heap of extra costs in this design, essentially because it was a lazy design to start with. It was purely done to say, hey, we got this approved on the site, but in the buildability of it was very hard. We were able to then redesign that site to have 2 freestanding 4-bedroom houses on there. So it markets a lot better for the developer when they finish the project, rather than the 3-bedroom attached dwellings. And we're talking the same block, but larger houses were able to get approved on there, and the overall build cost come in cheaper than what the previous one was.
So they got better quality property, bigger property, cheaper price.
That's correct. And that's purely based off a building designer being able to make the most work on that block or get the best outcome achievable on that block.
I really want to summarize it for everyone that's listening. Building designers, town planners, property consultants, if you are looking to go down that path, and it could be just as little as you're buying a property with the ambition of wanting to do a granny flat on it. And I know that as interest rates have really started to come up, although we are maybe seeing them flatten out and come down over the following months, but definitely come up of the years of 2024 and, for a bulk of 2025, if you're wanting to do property and wanting to buy properties and add, a granny flat on it, or maybe subdivide, or you want to knock it down and build a duplex, or you may have held a property for 10 years and John down the road built his duplex for X amount of money 10 years ago. It doesn't necessarily mean what you could do then, you can do now. And it's important to make sure that you find these property consultants and building designers and spend the money with them early on to know exactly what you can or can't do, or what are the three various options that you've got on that particular property where you can exit at a very good price or even exit at a lower price but still making profit. If you can cover all your bases and walk out with money even after a worse and best possible case scenario, that's what it's all about. It's all about, yes, still taking a risk, but if you can mitigate that risk as much as you possibly can by bringing in the right level of consultants, because we just heard John then, we don't go to a lawyer to do this, we go to a building designer. We don't chat with our accountant on what he thinks we should do. We'll be chatting with a town planner. We don't talk to, dad who built, the shed at the back or the granny flat at the back 40 years ago. We talk to a building designer, because the cost may change the profit materially. The slope of the block, we've heard, can stop a development in its tracks. Just because your zoning has changed from, a low density to a medium or high density doesn't necessarily make your block more valuable. So you need to factor that in. One of the big things, one of the key takeaway points that I want us all to really understand off the back of what John said was, don't necessarily wait, 6, 12, 18, 24, 5 years, 10 years, because the cost is only going to increase. There's going to be new inclusions where we're living in a society, in a government where it's all about making things more efficient with energy. And that unfortunately does mean for the time being that it's additional costs coming out of our back pocket, where it doesn't necessarily improve the value that we can sell for or maybe rent for in the future. Because I can tell you now, a tenant does not walk in and say they are beautiful double glazed windows, that's going to save me 6 cents per hour on my heating and cooling. A tenant's in there to try to pay the least amount of as they can, or a person wanting to buy your particular property doesn't say, wow, it's got a 5,000 litre water tank, I'm going to pay you an extra $25,000 for that luxury. It's a water tank that's ugly, that sits on the side of the house that they probably didn't want anyways. But these are the little things that you guys need to take into consideration when you're performing the feasibility of your particular purchase, chatting with the right professionals, having an understanding of your cost and your budget, being able to brief the person with what you're wanting to achieve, but then working with people who are solution focused, not somebody who is going to make you happy and give you what you want. Because quite often, and I've worked with John multiple times, individually myself, going to him as a client and working together, I want lots of fancy things. I love all the fancy things in there because I think it's going to improve value and it's going to walk out with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth additional profit. And John stops me in my tracks very early, or any professional should stop you in your tracks very early. Is this going to improve value? Do you have the budget to actually facilitate what you're wanting to achieve? And what looks great in a magazine doesn't necessarily mean that we can do this in real life. Because in the end, you need to have the builder who's got the conceptual idea of how to bring it into its physical state, not just what looks good and may not stand the test of time. So John, I really want to thank you very much for your time. And, for anybody that's listening, you can reach out to John if you're here in New South Wales and you're wanting to look for properties, or you may have a property in New South Wales, you're wanting to understand what you can do. You can reach out to him. John, how can they reach out to you, mate?
No, the easiest way is to email at john@karaplan, karaplan.com.au.
And have you got a website they can look you up on?
It's just karaplan.com.au. It's a little bit outdated, but we're busy always helping clients rather than updating websites.
All the best professionals where their websites are outdated. I know mine is as well. But I hope everyone's got to really understand a lot about what goes into, the planning side of things, or when you are looking to buy a property to even add a granny flat on there. There's a lot of different moving parts in there because you are dealing with councils and you are dealing with state governments. So it's important to have the right professional. We heard it now, town planner, building designer or architect who you may consult with prior to purchasing that particular property, and they can give you even a fundamental understanding of cost, or even if they've got the time, do a quick drawing for you to see what's actually plausible. That's how you make money, especially when you're wanting to look at property from a development lens. I'm really looking forward to bringing on our next professional, which is doing this bit of a professional series, bringing on some really good people that I know in the industry who are great professionals helping people achieve some extraordinary things. But when we're looking to bring on our next professional, he lives and breathes development, and he does development all over Australia. So John, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate all the knowledge and expertise that you've provided. I look forward to doing many things with you moving forward in the future. And in our next couple of episodes, guys, I will be sharing some actually real deals that John and I have done, that we've bought and sold, and why we sold it, why we're constructing on it. You'll get a really good understanding and deep dive into the way we think than when we're doing certain projects in certain places of the country. Thank you, John.
No problem. Thanks for having me.